Our next guest wrote a scathing article for USA Today Sports about Larry Fedora, UNC coach, and his dismissal of CTE in football last week at the ACC Media Days. As he wrote, no need to dance around this. If Fedora actually believes what he said, he's too dumb to coach college football and should be fired immediately. Joining us here on the show is longtime college football writer and insider for USA Today Sports. And that is Dan Wolken. Dan, good morning.
What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good, bud. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Now, I thought you had a couple of interesting pieces or a couple of interesting lines in this piece about Larry Fedora, and one of which is that the difference between we know nothing about CTE and that we don't know everything about CTE is a very important distinction to make. Why is that so important as we debate the merits of safety in football and CTE like Larry Fedora brought up?
Well, one of the things I think we've seen in society is people who like to muddy the water sometimes do it as an excuse for inaction. And I think with Larry Fedora, the idea that we don't know everything about CTE, I mean, we understand that. Everyone who's followed football, who's understood what these stories mean, knows that we're in the very beginning of understanding, and the brain is a very hard thing to study. But we have seen enough, I think, that common sense would tell us when 111 out of 112 brains of former NFL players have CTE in one study. In another study, you've seen very high rates of CTE incidents. And plus, just anecdotally, a lot of the mental issues and the suicides and things that have been associated with NFL players, there's something going on here that we need to pay attention to. And we don't know everything, but we know enough to say that this is an issue that demands our attention, it demands care, and it demands talking about it in a way that is serious and not discouraging science.
His AD came forward and said, well, he spoke incorrectly, but we understand what he was saying, trying to kind of soft play this and say maybe he was misinterpreted or he didn't suggest the right way to say it, but his heart's in the right place. Do you think that UNC was actually going, dude, what the hell are you thinking?
Well, I think certainly there was a lot of that, especially University of North Carolina has been very aggressive in terms of the research of CTE on the academic and medical side. Also, his comments about how if we change football dramatically in 10 years, we're not going to recognize it, and America is going to go down with it, which is exactly what he said, is just insane. And it's a total loss of perspective by Larry Fedora about the importance of football and about what he does for a living. And so I think a lot of sort of the people who were just aghast at the comments, it wasn't just kind of trying to muddy the waters on CTE. It was America's going to suffer as a result of eliminating kickoffs or whatever, which I just think is unhinged and ridiculous.
Dan Wolken joins us from USA Today as we discuss a little college football with him, although you also wrote a piece about Josh Hader, and we just talked about Josh Hader getting a standing ovation over the weekend, and we really kind of delved into that earlier in the hour. So I do want to ask you what your reaction was to Hader getting the standing O this weekend.
Well, the thing I was curious about is what did he do to deserve a standing ovation? Like, I understand redemption and I understand contrition and we're a forgiving society and all of that. But what did he exactly do to deserve a response from people where they get up out of their chairs and cheer him? I mean, the facts are still very elemental here. At 17 years old, he posted things on his Twitter account that were vile, racist, and homophobic thoughts that reflected a serious problem. And if he doesn't have those views now, fine. I would like to know why. Rather than just an apology, now he denied he ever had those views. I don't really know if I believe that because Even though we've all done dumb things when we were younger, I certainly have never done anything that professed racist views or white power or the KKK. So regardless of that, I'd like to know more about how he made that transformation. But even if he didn't and just said he never had those views and he apologizes, well, that's fine. You can either take him at his word or not take him at his word. But what exactly did he do to deserve a standing ovation in that circumstance? I don't get that.
Dan Wolken joins us, USA Today Sports. On the actual football side of things, Nick Saban last week at SEC Media Days kind of blamed the media, which he tends to do. He's pretty good at it, about creating a quarterback controversy out of nowhere and tried to basically slam the media for trying to create this narrative. Is this a media creation in any way, shape, or form, or is this a legitimate competition that we do need to kind of constantly keep an eye on this summer?
Oh, yeah. Well, Nick Saban was being very disingenuous when he said that. If anybody created the controversy, it was him by changing quarterbacks at halftime of the national championship game, which, by the way, was exactly what he needed to do given that they won. Look, all offseason, from the moment that game ended until September, the question about who was going to start a quarterback for Alabama is the most interesting question in college football. Now, ultimately, we'll find out, and they'll make a decision, and we'll see if they try to use both guys or if they just go with one or if they go back and forth. But to say it's not a story or to say that it's a media creation is just not the case. And I think Nick Saban knows that, but he's trying to deflect a little of the attention and the pressure off his players, which is understandable. But there's no question that this is a very real issue. It's a very real controversy. And regardless of which one he picks, he's going to have, a player who believes they should be starting, and which will set in motion a whole other series of questions, which is whether that player who doesn't win the job is going to transfer.
Is Georgia, again, the best challenger to Alabama overall in the SEC this year?
Yeah, because Georgia's got the second best team, the second best roster. And they play in the easier division over in the East. And Alabama's got a pretty favorable schedule, all things considered. So those two teams, barring a pretty big surprise, will play in the SEC championship game in Atlanta on the first Saturday in December. Now, there's certainly things that could derail that matchup, and injuries and bad luck and all kinds of factors that can shake up a season. But on paper, those are the two teams that stand apart as you go into the season, and it would be a big surprise if they're not playing for the SEC title at the end of it.
Dan Wolken joins us, USA Today Sports. I thought it was interesting last week that Aaron Murray kind of took a shot at Jeremy Pruitt's demeanor or disposition in terms of being a head coach. Aaron Murray said that Jeremy Pruitt might not have the personality to be a head coach, that Murray said he's not necessarily the right guy to be the CEO of a corporation. And Jeremy Pruitt got the job at Tennessee after the whole craziness that happened with Greg Schiano in the offseason. Do you think that there's question marks about how Jeremy Pruitt could run a program instead of just being an assistant coach within one?
Well, there's always questions when somebody who's never been a head coach before gets their first job. And in Jeremy Pruitt's case, he's getting one of the most difficult high-profile jobs in the SEC. Tennessee is one of those it's one of those programs where it's almost like an NFL team in terms of how they're covered. It's a statewide fan base. There's a lot of media in Knoxville and in the region that cover them. And it's a fan base that's been hungry for success for a long time and has not gotten it. So there's a lot of things that can, I think, derail you in that job. And you saw with Butch Jones, he just didn't have a lot of confidence when he started to get criticized. He got a little rabbit ears and kind of went off the rails. And we'll see if Jeremy Pruitt is able to stand up to that kind of pressure and block everything out. And, there's all kinds of learning curves when you sit in that head coaching position for the first time, and some guys thrive in it. They just know how to do it, and some guys don't. And until you actually see them on the field, we're all just kind of guessing.
Which hire do you like better, Jimbo at Texas A&M or Dan Mullen at Florida?
Well, I think in terms of can somebody win at a level higher than they've won it at in recent history, I would say Jimbo Fisher will probably elevate A&M above where they've been for quite a long time. Now, does that lead to a national championship? We'll see. At Florida, you're talking about a program where a number of coaches have been successful. Two have won national championships. I think it's going to be hard. It's hard for anyone to win a national championship. I think Dan Mullen's a good hire. I think he'll do a nice job, but there's no question that he's going to be up against it with Georgia in the East, and he's going to have to find a way to recruit better. And it's tough. I would say his odds of being as successful as Urban Meyer, for instance, are pretty low.
Finally, LSU, ascending or descending?
Well, I don't want to say they're descending because they've not really been all that high.
Right.
You look at where they've been the last few years. Obviously, Les Miles gets fired. Ed Orgeron comes in, and last season was just okay. And I think that's what you can expect most of the time with Orgeron is probably just okay. If he does better than that, great. And it certainly could go poorly, but this season they've got a really tough schedule, and I think 7-8 wins is probably about where they're going to be. At which point there's going to be a lot of teeth gnashing among LSU fans about, is Ed Orgeron really the right guy?
Dan Wolken joins us, national columnist for USA Today Sports. He focuses on college football, so check it out coming up as we now enter the August month and then into camps and into the preseason, if you will, for college football. I also hope that you find a good Aperol Spritz. I've never heard of this drink, Dan, but now I'm very intrigued by it after your tweet.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge drink over in Europe. There was an article about it in the New York Times. I guess Aperol is doing a big marketing push in the United States, and it's a great drink. It's a little Aperol, which is kind of like a bitter orange liqueur type drink, and you mix it with a little champagne or cava, and top it off with a little club soda and an orange slice. It's a terrific drink.
That sounds so foo-foo, and I love the idea of you slugging a couple of these and then going to cover an SEC football game. That's perfect.
Hey, when you're sitting out there in a hot, 95-degree sticky day, an Aperol Spritz really hits the spot.
Follow Dan on Twitter at Dan Wolken for the latest on college football and other things. National columnist, USA Today Sports, rather. Check it out there on Twitter at Dan Wolken. Dan, as always, buddy, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dan Wolken joining us this morning here on the DA Show on CBS Sports Radio.